Right, hello. So we've finished Davison. How do you feel about that, Lib?
I'm glad we finished it, to be honest. I think he's my least favourite Doctor that we've seen so far.
There we go. And I have found my Davison experience to be somewhat disappointing. I'll be dead honest. Now, been pondering why this is and who's to blame and what this means in the overall nature of the story. So I have two exhibits to share with you. This is exhibit one. I don't know if any of you are Magic the Gathering players, but I'm a nerd and I'm a Magic the Gathering player. Right now that's backwards. And I know you might not know what Magic the Gathering cards are, but obviously this new set, I'm very excited about this new set. Here's what the Fifth Doctor does, and I'll explain what this means. At the beginning of your end step, put a 1/1 counter on each creature you control that didn't attack or enter the battlefield this turn. Untap those creatures. So I tell you, it didn't attack. So I tell you what that means in layman's terms. It basically means if you and the Doctor and your companions and friends, whoever, sat back, waited, and did nothing, then they get bigger and stronger until eventually when they do something. So the idea is that there's within the Fifth Doctor, there's this notion of waiting for activity. Inaction. Exhibit 2. Any of you are long-term Doctor Who fans? This is one of the New Adventures book, the 4th New Adventures book. This isn't canon, but in my opinion, it's as good to canon as it's going to be. Now, this is when the Ace is in the 7th Doctor's subconscious, and she stumbles across a figure, and she releases him from captivity. And this is what he says. He says, "Hello," he whispered up at Ace. "I'm the Doctor, or rather I was, a long time ago." He attempted to stand, but found that he couldn't. Ace supported him. "I wanted a place to play cricket, you see, a sunny glade and a pot of tea, but he," that's the 7th Doctor, "wouldn't let me. We were at war," he said. The old Doctor's voice was full of injured innocence. "And we were all needed. The other Doctors all cooperated to some extent, but I objected." He stared at the landscape all around as if seeing it for the first time. So that's the Fifth Doctor there. And the idea is that in the Machiavellian, suspicious, mysterious way that the 7th Doctor operates, the 5th Doctor comes to represent the consciousness of the Doctor, or the conscience, there we go, of the Doctor. And as a result, he's the 5th Doctor takes on the internal strife within the 7th Doctor of actually behaving the way he does. And so this is two indications of how the Fifth Doctor is viewed by fandom and indeed by flipping Paul Cannell of all people. That he was the Doctor that represents the good in the Doctor, represents the not fighting, represents the doing the right thing. I'm not entirely sure if my experience of the Fifth Doctor holds up to that. I don't.
Fighting, he was really violent.
Yep.
And also, being inactive isn't the same as not fighting.
There we go. So I actually think that the picture that we've got of the Fifth Doctor, what he has come to represent in a lot of fandom's minds, isn't in any way representative of the Fifth Doctor. I think it is in actual fact unhelpful. Here's the story of the Fifth Doctor from my perspective, okay? And this is how I'm starting to rationalise it. Fifth Doctor comes into being after we've had a version of the Doctor who, more than any other Doctor before, starts to get deeply involved in the fabric of the universe, okay? All the stuff with the Guardians, okay? That's the closest the Doctor has got to gods, if you like, than any of the prior Doctors before it. You could have argued that the Third Doctor and his relationship and the Second Doctor relationship with the Time Lords was pushing towards that, but the Fourth Doctor's era debunks the whole idea of the Time Lords being these massively important figures. They're just bureaucrats and corrupt so-and-sos. So therefore, the Fourth Doctor, towards the end of his tenure, especially due to the events of Legopolis, that's when the Doctor has become his most entwined in the universe and his most important in terms of the wider universe. And I think the Fifth Doctor starts as almost a retreat away from that, almost like trying to get back to brass tacks. So in his first couple of stories, 4 to Doomsday being a prime example, it's much more First Doctor-y. Drops down, wants to have an explore. Oh, look at this exciting microscope. Isn't it lovely? And then we get little things like Black Orchid, And we get stories like the start of Earthshot, where he goes into Adric. He's got, oh, look at this book, isn't it good? And I genuinely feel that the Fifth Doctor does want to potter about and have a nice time, but he still stands up. He still behaves like we've always expected the Doctor to behave. The problem is, and I've said this some time ago, I don't think that this Doctor can cope with having to look after this ragtag bunch of misfits.
Look after any of them.
He
Look
fails.
after themselves.
He fails miserably.
It's a group of strong, independent women.
Well, yeah, and Adric.
Oh.
So that's the issue, I think, because this is the first Doctor since Hartnell to lose a companion. And I think that's the narrative arc of this Doctor. He loses Adric, okay? That absolutely obliterates him. I don't think he's got the emotional maturity to deal with that. Then he takes on Turlough. He knows Turlough's got issues, could be a problem. He's intrigued. As a being, I don't think he knows particularly how well to cope with that. Loses Nyssa. Nyssa clearly the companion in his mind who's best suited to him. And that's true of Davison as well. He said that of Nyssa. I think that the Fifth Doctor feels that Nissa's a good fit for him. And what is he left with? He's left with Tegan. Now, Tegan is class. There's no two ways about it. Tegan's absolute class. But the problem is she's bolshy and she fights back. She doesn't take his nonsense. So he gets more... aggressive's the wrong word, but certainly he's not the laid-back, chill-back Doctor that we've seen in other incarnations in the past. Oh, sorry. And then, of course, she leaves, Turlough leaves, and we end up with Perry. And during his time as the Doctor, as Lib has made reference to, we've seen him with more guns in his hand along the way. He kills Chameleon. It's almost like, well, this is what I've been forced to. This is what I've been pushed to. He's tried his best to avoid conflict. But in trying to avoid conflict, things often end up worse. Almost everybody in Warriors of the Deep, probably everybody, something off screen, dies horribly. There should have been another way. Well, there should. Maybe you should have dealt with it better at the start of the story, rather than trying to avoid people, trying to make a nuclear reactor over. Do you know what I mean? Overheat or whatever you do with nuclear reactors. Weirdly, the time this Doctor has seemed most chilled out, apart from when he's been playing cricket in Black Orchid, is when he's with his incarnations, bizarrely. And then he gets to play it being the first Doctor again and going on the run. But time's caught up with the Doctor and he can't behave in those ways anymore. And that's what we see. His encounter with the Daleks here is the most continuity-laden mishmash. He can't even go in and correct the mistake he should have sorted out as the Fourth Doctor and actually do Davros over. So what do we end up with? We end up with Caves van der Zani. And Caves van der Zani is the absolute perfect send-off for this Doctor because his ultimate aim there is not save the world. His ultimate aim there is not bring down this dreadful businessman. It's purely save the life of this person he's just met. Because it's almost as if that's his redemption, isn't it? By making the sacrifice for himself and saving Perry, it kind of rounds off the mistakes he's made throughout his time, and then he regenerates. And we shall see what the net result of that is when we pick up.
I think you just retcon the
Well, I'm having to retcon.
Look at what that means. It's retroactive continuity.
And I am. And the reason I'm doing that is because I still love Davison. And the reason I still love Davison is I think he's a fine actor, and I think it's none of this confusion in my mind is actually Davison's fault. The issue with Davison is he's a good actor and he acts off the scripts, I think. He's not a baker, where he just comes in and beat on Baker, and the script is just a vessel for him to beat on Baker. I think Davison wants to make this character work and wants to tell a story here. But even though this era of Doctor Who tries to set it up as this soap opera thing, an idea that only really comes to fruition in his penultimate story, and then as I'm retconning it, arguably his last story, there isn't the room for him to behave that way. So sometimes it does feel as if he's just getting dragged along by events because, as an actor, he's playing within the shape of the story, unlike a baker or a Pertwee even, who will cut against it now and again and make their mark. So Davison's a fine actor, and I really genuinely feel that he has a version of the Doctor that is awesome and brilliant. But to be perfectly honest, it's a version of the Doctor that's sculpted in the way that Doctor Who's made now, with the oversight of a showrunner, with a sense of continuity within a season and stuff like that, and not the sort of continuity that he was getting, which was Ian Levine saying, "Oh, well, you know, it's time around to invention," what all that meant. So, where does that leave us? Well, Davison's era is a disappointment in terms of just what's on the page, but I want to make this work. I want to make this work in the overall story of the Doctor. And like I say, this Doctor has come along, tried to go back, I think, to brass tacks, tried to go back to being just bumbling about, getting ourselves into scrapes. No. The universe has come to, he's too intertwined in the universe, the Doctor is. And as a result, he can't be that Doctor again. That is not going to work for him. And we'll have to see what comes of that as we go forward. So Davison, yeah, sadly, I hate to say this, but I think my perception of Davison overall has taken a knock because of this process. The good, no, you're not. The good stories are great, but there's too few of them and they come too late. I thought Frontiers was absolutely great. I really enjoyed that. I think Planet of Fire stood up. Although it's not to my taste, Earthshock and Resurrection of the Daleks are both solid stories. I love The Awakening. My gosh, if we could have had more stories like The Awakening, I really think that this we would look at this era in a completely different way. I think this Doctor would suit historical stories really well. And then, of course, we've got Kinder, and we've got Snake Dance, and we've got Caves of Androzani. 3 stories that I don't think would work, certainly up until this point, would have worked with any other Doctor other than Davison. And although one of the things that makes Doctor Who work so well is the variety, you know, and I've said this, you know, it can tell so many different stories. You can't help but feel that if they could have just moved into that end, if you could have had more Kinders, I mean, Kinder's a very singular story, but you know what I mean, Kinder, Snake Dance, that sort of cerebral thoughts. If you could have more Awakening, I really think those stories would work. And of course, Caves of Androzani just goes to show, if you give this man a decent script and something to do within it, some clear direction on what the Doctor's all about, then he can pull out an amazing, and it is an absolutely amazing performance. I mean, it really is an amazing performance. Somebody who can hold that the cliffhanger of the 3rd episode, and that power there is just absolutely brilliant. So I love Davison. I love all the Doctors, even the Twee. But it could have been, there should have been another way. People, there should have been another way. But there we go. C'est la vie. On to pastures new. Already in the comments, there has been some nod towards what's coming next. But I tell you something, I want the next era of Doctor Who to work. I really want it to work. I want it to work because I think that the next Doctor has a clear vision for how he wants his Doctor to be. Davison didn't. There's no disrespect to Davison, but when asked, I was trying to find this earlier. Davison was asked by a kid, as soon as he got announced he was going to be on the programme, how are you going to play the Doctor? And Davison didn't have an answer. He said, how do you think I should play the Doctor? And he said, I think you should play it like Tristan, but brave. And that was his response. I don't think that's the right response. I think you need a vision, a bit of a vision, or it needs to be in the script. I don't think it was in the script. Still, not to worry. The next guy's got a vision. We shall see how that all comes together. Anyway, farewell, Peter Davison. I love you still, even though the scripts didn't help you out. And quite honestly, the structure of the show at this time wasn't right for you. If anybody's listened to 14 minutes of this, onwards with your day. Do something more interesting than listen to me. I'll see you next time.